And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, February 23rd, 2018. We have a very powerful program for you today. It's a little change from when we closed last week, what we intended to go into. A lot of things have happened, and we think they're very important, so we're going to talk about them today. Then we'll get back into our regular program next week. So let's begin right away. I want to bring in just a little short news story that you may not have caught on the TV. It's about the volcanoes erupting in Indonesia. We'll talk a little briefly about that. Then we're going to get into what everyone has been talking about, is the school shooting from February 14th, 2018. We're going to talk about that and bring you some insights from the Nuggets portion and bring us up to date on the change of the emotion of the people in this nation. And then we're going to talk about how that ties into what we're going to call in this segment the herd mentality and how it will be created. And we're going to use God's holy word to show you how what we're looking at right now before our very eyes is this herd mentality that was just like it was before World War II and at the time of Jesus Christ. You ready? Let's get going. The volcano, February 19th, just last week. In Indonesia, actually in Jakarta, the rumbling of Mount Sinabung of the Indonesian island of Sumatra shot billowing columns of ash more than 16,400 feet into the atmosphere with hot clouds and down its slopes on Monday. What an incredible picture if you're looking at that in the background here. Look at that. How would you like to live on an island where that's going on all the time? It's been going on now for the last 3 years. So now, why am I bringing this out to you? Jakarta, Indonesia this is actually only one of 3 active volcanoes on the island. Now, here's why I'm bringing this up. Take a look at this headline that I just copied and pasted into my PowerPoint presentation here. Indonesia issues volcanic ash flight warnings into Mount Sinabung as it erupts, all right? So here we have this cloud that goes up and it begins to spread. So as it spreads, look at the subtitle underneath that. Largest eruption this year sends ash more than 7 kilometers into the sky, turning day into night across 5 nearby districts. I want you to pay attention to that because I'm asking you to put this on your radar now. One of the things the Bible tells us about before the return of Jesus Christ is that the sun would be turned into darkness. A lot of people think that's an eclipse, but it lasts too long for just an eclipse. So what we're going to be looking at is we saw just a couple years ago up in Iceland and in Greenland, when you began to see all those clouds moving into Europe, began to totally disrupt the flight pattern, growth of plants and the temperature in Europe. So you're going to see over the next few years more and more of these volcanic activities beginning to erupt, which is going to disrupt the world as we know it today. So that's the only reason I'm bringing it up today. I just wanted to bring that to your attention so that we can pay attention, because the elements that bring about the return of Jesus Christ, they multi. They're not just one or two different things. It's an environment that begins to change, because the Bible says that all creation groans in travail for the return of Jesus Christ. That means everything, the entire creation, plants, animals, everything, moaning, waiting for the return of Jesus Christ. I've got one more picture I want to show you. What an incredible picture this is. This is the volcanic ash from Mount Sinabung as seen from, I don't know if I get this correct now, Baristagi, Karo, which is around the island. There was a photograph that was taken. So you're down and you're looking up past this monument statue that they have for all these clouds in the background. So when I saw that, I said, wow, I wonder what goes through the people's minds when they begin to see something like that, and you're living on an island, and if this erupts and you have, just like it was years and years ago with many cities, and the lava begins to flow and just wipes out these islands. Earthquakes begin to take place, tsunamis begin to move. So it's just mind-boggling when you think about the things that's happening right in front of us. And they're happening more and more frequent, just like with the earthquakes. Anyway, I just want to bring that to your attention, put that on your radar. So now let's get into our program. On last week's program on February 16th, we actually taped it on the 14th. All right. This was just last week, so I'm going to bring this up. I'm bringing a portion here what we began talking about, because we were talking about last Wednesday morning, talking about our nation and unskirting the sins of our nation, and specifically focusing on our youth and children of what was going on, unknowing that by that afternoon that there would be another mass shooting and there would be 17 children dead. Now, what I don't know, and I can't seem to find anywhere for some reason, how many children were wounded in addition to how many people are dead. I typed that in yesterday afternoon, and eventually it's out there, or it may even be out there now, I just couldn't find it. That why are they not talking about how many others were wounded? Because they brought many to the hospital. In fact, they told them at the time of the shooting, have every hospital ready. And I just couldn't find how many were wounded. Normally you find how many killed and how many wounded. And you don't even see that listed. I couldn't find it yesterday. All right, so anyway, let me get back to the program here. We began talking about the unskirting of the sins of Israel. We started with the abortions of what was taking place, and then we went on. All right, now I'm just showing you this to show you how about the children, and then we're going to get back into what I want to talk about with the shooting and how significant of what's going on at that particular time. So we started with the abortions. Then the next thing we talked about was human trafficking and how the nations are using children for human trafficking. Then we talked about the child abuse. We brought many statistics in. And then eventually we talked about drug abuse and how it's affecting a lot of the youth. All right, so now that's what we intended to get into today. We were going to pick up here, follow through with more and more of the unskirting and talking about the sins, how God will literally begin to unveil all the sins of what's going on, because the nation has to be warned so they have the opportunity to repent. So now, what we're looking at is the beginning of the unveiling of our sins in this nation, and that, for that matter, for around the world. So then, by that afternoon, everything changed. Everything changed, all right? The last thing we brought up last week was pornography and how the children are being captured. They're being sold into sex trade and human trafficking, and the amount of pornography from every walk of life, from nearly every age, man, woman, and youngster, doesn't matter, and how much money and time is being spent on something that actually, they have proved it, that actually changes the molecular structure of your mind and begins to warp the way people think. And it is actually controlling. In many cases, people are hooked on this stuff, which is absolutely horrendous. Then, by that afternoon on February 14th, all right, which of course we had already taped our program that morning, 17 children were killed in a Florida high school shooting, one of the deadliest in history. So I just brought in a couple of pictures here. I just wanted to show you a few of the pictures that we're going through. Now, this picture particularly caught my interest because for some reason, I don't know if it's the trauma in the people's faces of what's going on, the emotion of the loss of what they have here. But when I saw that picture, it was very interesting because last Wednesday, when we did this program here from New Orleans, was the day after Mardi Gras. If you know anything about the religion that centers around that, in fact, we've been talking about it in several programs right here on News Nuggets and Insights for God's Unchanging Word, Mardi Gras, and how the day after Mardi Gras is called Ash Wednesday. So what you're looking at right there with that picture, whether people realized what was going on or not, that cross on her forehead is the ash that she got sometime that morning. Who knows, maybe she just dropped off her children for school, or she took the family, they went to church beforehand, and the priest would put the ashes and put the cross on their forehead on Ash Wednesday. And it was also, of course, Valentine's Day. And I had to wonder when I saw that picture, and that's why I'm using it today, if Satan isn't back in his chair laughing at the mockery of what's going on, thinking that if you're going to use a religion in this world that is an absolute counterfeit of God's plan and thinking that God's going to protect you, you better think again. Because what you're looking at On a very day, one of the highest points for especially the Catholic Church, they call it Ash Wednesday, which begins the count of the 40 days, what they would call Lent, moving into Easter. It began on that day that this shooting took place. I thought there was an irony in it, and when I saw this picture and that lady with the ash on her head, I was quite taken back. Now, let me say this now. I'm not mocking this lady, because you see, this world does not know the truth of God. And that's why we're having this program. That's why we ask you every week to take your program and share it with somebody, because this world has no clue what's going on. So when I saw that, there's a person who literally trying to live up to what she believes, what's been taught from her family and generation after generation after generation. What the Bible says is Satan who deceives the whole world. So while the world is trying to get close to God, because they have a counterfeit religion, they have moved further and further away from the truth. and it's almost like God, that Satan allowed it, or maybe even orchestrated this killing to take place on that specific day. I don't know, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention, because it's very concerning when you begin to see these specific things. Let me bring out one more thing while I'm here, and this just popped in my head. If you remember the other shooting that they had at the gay bar a couple years ago, there were 49 people killed and the shooter, which brings it to 50. And 50 in God's plan is called Jubilee, and Jubilee is freedom. And it's almost like Satan there, around that time, used the 50 as a mark to mock God's plan. So anyway, that's just a side note. I thought I'd bring it out. It just popped in my head, so I thought I'd share that with you while we're here. All right, let's move on. In this shooting, there's something that's taken place I want to bring out now. This is in the securing of our nation, all right? This is Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, one of more than 140,000 schools in the U.S. In addition, there are more than 5.6 million commercial buildings and more than 107,000 shopping centers in the United States. So how do you watch all of that? It's impossible. It is literally impossible to watch all this and think that we're going to pass a law preventing guns in people's hands, that our nation is going to be safe. So now, at the very moment that this began to take place, there was a shift in the mindset of the people in this country. In no time at all, there was a movement across the nation to ban guns that swept across our nation. This was just a couple headlines. I went on the internet and so, what's going on with this? Look at this. Student planned protest, Washington march to demand gun control. Teen gives emotional speech at gun control rally after mass shooting. Florida school shooting, survivors rally for action on gun control, and celebrities react following the Florida school shooting variety. So all of a sudden, this movement begins to take place. And they're talking about all these children that are uniting. Well, I want to tell you something. There's no way that all these children can do this on their own. So what is going on here? What is taking place? All right, how did this happen so fast? All right, so now we're going to bring in now what I'm talking about is called the creating the herd mentality. Now I'm just going to bring this in here, and then when we get into the news nuggets section of this a little bit later, we're going to go into this in depth about how the Bible talks about this herd mentality. But we're looking at it being developed right now. So I want to let you know that's where we're moving into right now to talk about. School shooting on February 15, 2018. This is the day following the shooting. All right, this is simply one day later, all right? That's all this is one day later. The very next night, the people come together to create what's called a prayer vigil. Now, you would get together with a prayer vigil. You would think there'd be a minister, a pastor, a rabbi, a priest. Somebody would be there leading in prayers. But something changed. This is one day later, right? While everyone's at this prayer meeting, let me show you what took place. The prayer vigil was seized by special interest groups. This is less than 24 hours, or just after 24 hours after the shooting. So here's a report from what's called the Gateway Pundit on February 15th. Here's the headline: "We will help lead you to help other communities elect people who will do the right thing, who will make sure no one's families will ever have to go through this again. Now, I tried to track down how did this get started and where is it going and how did a prayer vigil get hijacked? And we got the video, and you will trace everything back to this 24 hours after the shooting. Let's play that video. It's only about a minute and a half long.
The floor of the United Arms and make sure that the losses that our families here in our community have sustained are not in vain. That Ted Deutsch and I don't have to stand on the floor of the United States House of Representatives one more time with a moment of silence, mourning more losses from gun violence. We must hold other people's elected officials accountable. We must make sure that they hear us. The people behind me, they stand with us on these issues. So we will help lead you to help other communities elect people who will do the right thing, who will make sure no one's families ever have to go through this again. And I think it is fitting that the mascot for Stoneman Douglas is the Eagles, the beacon and the strength that is the United States of America. And so from this Cypress Bay Lightning Mom, I tell you tonight, the Eagles will soar again, and we will stand with you every step of the way. Thank you so much.
All right, so as you could see from that video clip, that in the middle of this prayer rally, it became a chant. It's going to be a chant. And the words are talking about nothing to do with God, nothing to do with prayer. It became a special interest to create a movement to get across what they've been wanting to get across for decades about gun control. All right, so here's the report from what Debbie Wasserman Schultz said. Here's the headlines. It says, Debbie Wasserman Schultz turned the candlelight vigil in Parkside, Florida into a political pep rally tonight. She says, we must hold other people's elected officials accountable. We must make sure that they hear us, that the people behind me, they stand with us on these issues, so we will help other communities elect people who will do the right thing. So let me repeat that now. I'm going to put that in bold letters here. So we will help other communities elect people who will do the right thing. So this became now not a chant to protect their children. This is a movement now being sponsored by tens of millions of dollars. And I just heard that George Soros' son just donated another $680 million to the Democratic Party. And the timing is absolutely incredible now as they began this movement before the election coming up. So what they're looking at now is they're going to use this now, and they're going to use these children as their shield to accomplish what they have not been able to accomplish in decades. And you need to bring this we need to bring this to your attention, because what's going on here is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I just want to bring out one city that has some of the strongest gun controls in our nation, not to mention Russia. Did you see what happened in Russia? There was 4 women shot coming out of a church. 4 Christian women coming out of a church was shot. Russia, under a dictatorship, so to speak, has the strongest gun controls in the world. And they've had it for over 100 years, and they can't stop it from going on. How do we think we're going to stop it here with the millions of guns they actually got out there? It's not the guns, it's the mentality and the mindset of what's going on. But look at Chicago now. Chicago experienced its deadliest year in almost 2 years, in 2 decades, in 2016. According to Chicago police, 762 people were killed, and an increase of 58% in 2015. The rise in homicides came from the number of shootings from 3,550 to 4,331 shooting victims. That jumped by 47% in 2016. I don't have 2017s. They said it dropped a little bit, but it was pretty high. Chicago has some of the highest gun controls there is, and they have some of the highest shootings in the nation. 1 year, 4,331 shootings in 1 year in a city that has gun control. So what is going on? It's really not about gun control. There's a mindset of the change, and we talked about that last 2 weeks ago when we talked about California. All right, this is a report that actually came out January 17, 2017. I showed that. Now, this is a list. What I'm going to show you, I'm just going to go through this real quick, showing you some of the deadliest single-day mass shootings in modern U.S. history includes, and it's not just schools. All right, so you ready? Let me run through this. Schools, churches, businesses, a cafeteria, a McDonald's, a postal center, an immigrant community center, a casino and resort, a gambling club, a nightclub, a Navy Yard, a street, a movie theater, 2 brokerage houses, a Buddhist center, a nursing home, a government center. Oops, let me stop. So we finish up with the government center. So now, how do you stop that? And it's anywhere these people find they have an easy target, they could just go out and kill somebody. So what I'm saying is an evil that's permeating our nation. It's like this cloud of evil has just set over our people, and where Satan can imbue himself into people's mindsets, it's like this horrendous power to destroy takes over. And that's why you normally find someone, when it's all over, they kill themselves. It's a rarity to actually find one of these shooters still alive that they're actually brought into custody, like you see here in the school. But that's just a list. Now, that's a list you can go find yourself online. That's where a lot of these mass shootings have taken place. There isn't one or two places. It's anywhere and everywhere. So now, let's talk about the serious issues with the movement itself or what's going on now. It is the ability to engage many people so quickly to get their messages out. That means that there's mega dollars being spent. The money's sitting in the account waiting to be able to get this across. How do you create these rallies so fast? How do you create the sign movements? How do you have people that are actually on payroll doing this day and night? So 24 hours later, they got people who's actually in that audience while they're on that stage with these people creating the chant. You know, they're creating the chant, no more guns, no more guns. How do these children do that on their own? They're just used as pawns now for people to be able to get their mindset across, and they're going to march them everywhere they can find, and they will probably accomplish something this time, because no politician is going to risk his career to make it look like he's not going to help our children. When what I'm showing you right here, it's not about the children, it's about accomplishing a goal to get their mission across. It is the ability to begin having people in the government willing to consider altering the Constitution. And as you have heard me say from this spot right here, is that this Constitution is the grounds that God built for you and I to protect our way, our beliefs, to be able to proclaim the return and the warning message that has to go out before the return of Jesus Christ. This will begin to alter some of the ground things. Now, it won't change it right away, but it will begin eating away at piece after this and piece after that. And the president has already said he's willing to talk about making some changes. So you'll begin to see the erosion now of the protection what we have on our people. All right, so when I say our people, I'm talking about the churches of God and our way of life. The emotional involvement is eerily reminiscent to the times in Europe and Germany right before World War II. What's really amazing is that on my way over to do the program this morning, I flipped the radio on, and Glenn Beck was talking about the very same thing. And he had someone he was talking to with a book called Hitler's Monsters. Hitler's Monsters, and how the people in Europe had no idea what was coming when little by little these changes were beginning to take place in the nation of Germany that began to sweep across Europe. And so we're in that time right now, and it's very reminiscent to the time of Jesus Christ. So now, I want you to remember this. I put this in on my own, and I said, and so because I was thinking about this, and how do I convey to the audience this? I wrote this: we will not change this nation until we are able to change the mindset of those who are educating the next generation. All right, let me read that again. We will not change this nation until we are able to change the mindset of those who are educating the next generation. We have seen now for at least 50 years, generation after generation, moving God out and moving in a secular way of life. And each generation is teaching the next generation and the next generation. And so what we're at now is a generation of people who run our nation who basically don't believe in God, and we've got a little reprieve from the last election. And it's time that we realize that unless we change the mindset of the people, you will not change the nation. So now, when we come back, we're going to talk about a scripture that should be alarming to all of us, about a scripture that God says, I will forsake your children. This is from God's holy word. It says, I will forsake your children. So when we come back, we're going to talk about God's warning to our nation for our children. So now, let's take a little video break. And I'm going to use this video this time. It's from Paul Harvey from 1965 because it illustrates what he said very prophetically back in 1965 of the time we are in right now. So take a look and I'll be right back.
If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. Paul Harvey. Good day.
Welcome back. Prophetic, huh? 1965. What caught my attention, why I brought that in the middle here, is that he made a statement there. He says, Our Heavenly Father, which art in Washington. I went back to the chant and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all the media now. You know, nobody's talking about God. They're talking about Washington. They're talking about government. They're saying that we're going to lead you now. Where they're going to be at? They're going to go to Washington, and we're going to help you elect people who think like we do. And God is out of the picture. So you're looking at prayer vigils of our children and our parents and the people across our nation who have been hijacked by a media and by a special interest group who's going to have everyone look to their way of life, and God is totally out of the picture. Absolutely astounding what we're looking at today. Now let's talk about it, all right? Let's talk about the creating of the herd mentality. So what's changed in the past 50 to 100 years that we're seeing all this? We didn't see these mass shootings 100 years ago. Do you know we actually have more gun controls and more legislation today than we had back then? And we have more violence and more shootings and more killings than we had back then. So it's not the guns. And as long as people continue to look at that, in fact, if you took all the guns away, they would just use knives. In fact, the radicals over in the Islamists now, these terrorists, they use automobiles and trucks. They're going to kill people. They'll find a way. And so the deal here is not about guns. It's about control. It's about controlling the mindset and the interest of a nation who wants to remove God from it. That is the core of everything that goes on. In fact, people want to blame God for allowing this to happen. And you might have seen that joke when people say, "Guy, why did you let this happen?" And God comes back with the reply, "He says, because you kicked me out." In other words, I'm not there. I can't help if you kick me out. So now, look what God says here in Hosea 4:6. "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being priests for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children." So what we're looking at now is a mentality of a people rising up for this movement. And this movement is we're going to fix our own problem without God. Because why? Because all these people now who are leading us, they're the ones who are going to fix this. They're going to take us to Washington, and we're going to rally around everything. They're going to change a few laws, and everything's going to be fine until the next shooting. Because you see, until you do what God says right here in that scripture, until you get back to the law of God, you will not remedy the problem that our nation has gotten itself into. It's that simple. And people will not hear that. They will not want to talk about that. So last week on our February 16th program, we began with the unskirting, talking about the abortion and the issues that's affecting our children. Think about this. Over 45 million babies were aborted, and they're being aborted every minute of every hour across our nation. Now, right after we did this, I received this video from Prager University. It's a little long, it's about 5 minutes long, but it talks about our children. So now here we're going to have this rally around these children that were shot while we continue to murder our babies by the millions. Let's play the video, and I'll be right back.
Imagine there's an organization that claims to stand for one thing, but actually stands for another. Imagine this organization calls itself a healthcare provider, but it's not involved in preserving life, it's involved in ending it. And imagine that you help finance this organization, whether you want to or not. Well, you don't have to imagine. This organization exists, and it has a name with which you are very familiar. It calls itself Planned Parenthood. And the deception begins right there. Planned Parenthood doesn't help people plan for parenthood, it helps people escape it. And that's only the start of its deceptions. Planned Parenthood tells you it's one of the nation's leading women's healthcare providers, but it provides very little healthcare. It tells you it provides adoption referrals, but the only adoption advice it is likely to offer is Google it. Most deceptive of all, Planned Parenthood tells you that abortions are a small part of what it does, but it performs more abortions than anyone else in America. Here are the facts. The folks who run Planned Parenthood boast that they provide life-saving cancer screenings. And they do, just not that many of them, less than 2% of the nation's screenings each year. They talk about providing breast exams. They do, but just not that many of them, again, less than 2% of the nation's total. They talk about providing ultrasounds, but the last thing they want to do is show a pregnant woman an image of her growing child. So they don't. The ultrasound is only for Planned Parenthood's use to better facilitate patients' abortions. In other words, abortion, not women's health, is Planned Parenthood's reason for being. Every year, it does more than a third of all abortions in America, over 321,000 of them. That's equivalent to every inhabitant of St. Louis or Pittsburgh wiped out every year. That's over 880 abortions every day. An abortion every 98 seconds. And while the number of total abortions in the United States is going down, Planned Parenthood's market share of abortions has increased from 23% in 2006 to 34% in 2016. So when Planned Parenthood says it's devoted to women's reproductive rights, what it means is it's devoted to aborting as many babies as possible. And here's the biggest deception of them all. Planned Parenthood would like you to believe that abortion is only 3% of the total services they provide. 3% doesn't sound like very much, does it? But here's how they get to that 3%. They count every discrete clinical interaction as its own service. What is a discrete clinical interaction? Pretty much anything you do from the moment you walk into one of their clinics. I'll give you an example. Let's say a woman comes into Planned Parenthood for one service, an abortion. Before providing an abortion, Planned Parenthood has to confirm that the woman is pregnant, right? So they administer another service, a pregnancy test. That's 2 services. Then, after the abortion, on your way out the door, they hand you a prescription. That's 3 services. And there are many other services provided during the abortion process that Planned Parenthood claims as discrete clinical interactions. In this way, Planned Parenthood is able to rack up 9.5 million of these so-called services each year. Divide the number of abortions, 321,000, by 9.5 million, and you get 3%. Even the Washington Post, a Planned Parenthood ally, declared this 3% figure very misleading. Rich Lowry of National Review nicely illustrated this phony statistic. It would be like Major League Baseball saying they sell 20 million hot dogs, but only play 2,430 games, so baseball is only 0.012% of what they do. So why does Planned Parenthood engage in all these deceptions? Well, as they say, follow the money. According to federal law, the United States government is not permitted to spend taxpayer money on abortions, but Planned Parenthood receives over $500 million a year in federal funding. Not for abortions, mind you, but for those other discrete clinical interactions. Over the last 10 years, its annual clientele has dropped 23%, almost a quarter. But during this time, its taxpayer funding has skyrocketed from $336 million in 2006 to $543 million in 2016. The reality is, just about everything about Planned Parenthood is a deception. Its purpose, its funding, its very name. That's why Planned Parenthood's biggest enemy isn't conservatives or religious people. Its biggest enemy is truth. I'm Lila Rose, founder and president of Live Action for Prager University.
That's pretty staggering when you see something like that put in front of you, and you realize that the people who are talking about protecting our children now and the gun control are pretty much the same people who promote abortions in this nation. It's a hypocritical society we live in today, and it needs to be brought out exactly where we stand. So now let's talk about how do we get this way. I'm going to go real short here because we've used this in the Constitution of Christian, and if you haven't seen that video, please write in and get a copy, and share this with as many people as you know, because you need to know how we went from a God-fearing nation led by leadership that brings in the principles and the foundation of the Bible itself to a nation that disregards God and its laws. So how did we get here over the last 100 years? I asked that question right after our first video segment when we took a break. It started right back in 1925 when we actually began moving God out of the picture with the Scopes trials, or called the monkey trials, in 1925. And even though the law protected Christians as the way of life, and that we were actually born and not evolutionized, we lost the battle, and within the next 5 to 7 years, states began to adopt evolution as a way of teaching. It had reached the point that evolution now is taught in schools and God cannot be taught. It has completely reversed the cycle of where it began in 1925. Then by 1954, the churches took an active part in saying nothing, because their focus was finance. And if they said anything, or they felt they would say anything about the politics of the nation and what moves our nation, or even who runs the office, they would lose their funding. So they went for the dollar and the greed and said nothing when God continued to be removing itself from the nation. All right, so now by 1954, the pulpits are silenced. So for the next 2 decades, systematically, piece by piece, we began moving God away from our school systems and our children. They removed prayer from our schools. They removed the opportunity to even say a prayer in the school itself. And by 1973, it had changed to the point that they actually approved legalizing abortion in this nation. The first time that this nation had actually passed a law that went total against human life in God's way, 1973. So we went from a nation who obeyed God, would have never been thought about abortion, to the point of approving it as a nation in a very short span of time. Then, by 1973, I'm sorry, I thought I had that already. So now let's move to 2015. 2015 now is the time that we actually moved the second law of removing man from God's way that procreates life, the covenant that God made with man at the beginning of creation, where marriage is between one man and one woman. It is the second time that we passed a law in this nation to remove God. So we have removed protection of life and the protection for the procreation of life and the marriage that honors the resemblance of God's plan with Jesus Christ in the marriage to his bride. And so here we have, in less than 100 years, the whole mindset of the way we think has actually been removed. So now here we are without God, and we have created the pen. You ever see a herd? You ever see them out west when they begin to herd up all the cattle, all the horses? Well, it's like they put them in a pen and they create a herd mentality. So now let's go back and look at it, because you can go back and look at some of the movies in the 30s, the 40s, and even in the 50s about what took place in Germany and how the mindset changed with the people. Is the exact same thing that took place in Jesus' day. So let me bring you something that's quite alarming. When you compare now the scriptures, when you compare the scriptures to the mindset of where we are today, you're going to see that eerily reminiscent of that evil taking over our nation. Are you ready? Let me show you now. Our children. When God is removed, people will seek guidance elsewhere. So now, let's stop. So when we're seeking guidance elsewhere, we're looking down in Florida at this rally movement now, to beginning to move across this nation. So what's the movement? We have removed God, so we're going to come in, we're the government, we're going to guide you and teach you how to elect the right people so that this doesn't happen again. In other words, just trust us. We're going to bring you to Washington, and you're going to make a difference, all those children that are out there. Why? Because it happens. So God's not doing it. We have to step in for you. That's what you're looking at. In Jesus' day, it was the Pharisees. All right? Before Jesus returns, it will be, because it's going to be here again. We look at the former, he tells us the latter. All right? So before Christ returns, it will be the beast and the false prophet at the hands of the Holy Roman revival. And just like in Jesus' day, you're going to see the church step in when all the catastrophe is created. And quite often you will see these catastrophes created by the element that wants you to change to their way of thinking. Now, I don't know if you realize this or not, but quite often people will stage the protest, or they will go out there and actually deliberately create the problem so that they can come in to fix the problem for you, even though they're the ones who created it. So now that's what's going to happen at the end time. Satan is going to come in, is going to disrupt this whole world. He's going to raise up this Holy Roman revival, and at the hands of this great almighty being, this religious leader, is going to bring peace to our world. Absolutely amazing, because you're seeing it on a very small scale right now taking place. So now going on, how do we do that? The Bible literally gives us the example of how it's done. Let's look at Matthew 26, beginning in verse 3. Then the chief priests of the scribes and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, where it was called Caiaphas, and they plotted to take Jesus by trickery and to kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. So here you have, just like down in Florida, they're in the midst of all the people. And what are they doing? They're creating the element to create the way to protect their interests going forward. You're looking at the same thing right here. All right, so now, they're creating the herd mentality back then. How did they do it? First of all, they create the need. Look what they say in John 11. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Now, you're looking at that across our nation, but since the election, is there everybody saying, we don't like what's going on. We had it moving to where God is no longer in the picture. Well, now God's coming back into the picture. They're talking about eliminating abortion. They're talking about marriages that are supposed to be between a man and a woman. And they thought it was all done. And so now, just like in Jesus' day, they said, we got to stop this. We got to stop this. And so what did they do? They bring him to the government. The religious leaders bring him to the government. It says, and when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. There's your protest. They're creating this plotting going on with the people, saying he's the problem. We need to stop this guy. Look what he's doing. And so that's what's going on here. And when they bound him, they led him away, and they delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. At the very end time, when you see that Holy Roman revival, it will be exactly the same way. And you and I need to pay attention to this, because it's very important that we understand what you're looking at today in the world. Now, I hear people say, well, I don't think we ought to be talking about politics. Okay, I understand that. And listen what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about politics. What I'm talking about is the politics that's going to affect your life. No, we're not into politics. We're totally against it on either side. Whether it's Republicans, whether it's Democrats, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're black or you're white. It's right and wrong. That's what we're talking about here. But if you don't understand how the nation changes, and you don't understand what's going on in politics, whether you agree with it or not, it doesn't make any difference. It's going to happen to you. And that's what was going on in Jesus' day. What did the religious leaders do? They led him away to Pilate. Who's Pilate? Pilate's the government. That was Washington in their Jerusalem. They took him to the government. At the end time, what is the church going to do? The Holy Roman Revival is going to go after the elect. And what are they going to do? They're going to rouse up the people, just like you see here. They're going to get this crowd mentality going. They're going to herd them up, and they're going to take you to the government, because they will have passed the laws and say, this man is breaking the law. Put him in prison or kill him. And that's what's going on. You're at that beginning stage. If you don't think it can happen, go back and look at pre-World War II. God has left us an example that is beyond compare. When you go back and look at some of these, especially these movies, there's a lot of them out there. You know, I'm tempted to go out and find those movies and actually put them on our website if they'll let us. Because these guys had a grasp of human nature back then, and showing you how the world changed right before their very eyes, and people sat back like chickens and just followed and did everything they were told to do. And we need to be able to get that warning out so that doesn't happen to God's people. All right, so now let's go on. So now, creating the herd. So now here's how they create the herd. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas to destroy Jesus. And the governor answered and said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? Now remember the story? The Pharisees said, listen, they're going to have a sacrifice for the people every year, and there's going to be a guy they're going to let go. So we need, in our herd, we need people that, just like down in Florida, no more guns, no more guns. What did they say? Barabbas. We want Barabbas. So they have Jesus, so they had their people in the crowds ready to go, so that when the time came, they had the right guy in. Their special interest is to protect themselves. So which of the two, he says, do you want me to release to you? And they said, Barabbas. But Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus who's called the Christ? They said to him, let him be crucified. Now this ought to, I hope I have made my point. Because what you're looking at today is a nation that has taken 100 years, and especially the last 50 years, to create the element that is ripe for the herd mentality. And you're seeing it begin to take place right before your very eyes. And who's doing it? They're doing it through the children. And the children that we, as God's people over the last 100 years, have simply turned over to the non-believers to run our nation. And each generation, that goes on from generation to generation removes further and further elements of God, to where even if you talk about God in many of the schools, the colleges, and the universities, you're mocked to scorn. People have things thrown at them. Their cars are broken into, and quite often they're beat up. And it goes on unchallenged in our nation. And so each generation now moves further and further away from God. So that's where we're at today. Our children. God forsakes our children because we have forsaken Him first, by turning them over to an ungodly leadership. Let me repeat this, and I said it earlier in just a little bit different way, but I'm going to say it again right here. You won't change the nation until you change those who are teaching the next generation. You have to teach the children from the time they're very young. And God says, show them the way that they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from that. So what have we taught them now? We told them when you're 5 to 7 years old, if you're a boy, you feel like you're a girl, well, let me help you change your sex. You know, let's go through all the changes, everything you want to go through, where the poor children don't have a shot at growing up under a godly nation anymore. It's sickening to see what's going on in our nation. But that's what's going on. So no matter how many laws you pass, so how many controls you try to put into place, you will not change the nation until you change the mindset. And you will not change the mindset until you begin to change the people who teach the next generation. When Jesus Christ comes back, with one fell swoop, He's going to wipe out all that evil. And He's going to set God's people to rule and to reign with Him for 1,000 years. And He's going to say, this is the way, walk ye in it. And if you're here in this program, God may be calling you to that truth, to be a part, to be a king and a priest, to rule and to reign with Him for 1,000 years. I hope you're listening and you'll be able to share this with everybody, because this is a very important program. Because you see, when you see those things that's going on right now, I don't know about you, but it sends chills down my back. I said, this is right before our very eyes, and we need to get that message out. So that's what we're looking at, and that's where we're at today. Biblically, next week we're going to get back into the question that we wanted to get into today, is where might we be in prophecy? It's quite interesting where might we be, and right before our very eyes it was happening right in front of us. One of the elements of what we want to talk about before the return of Jesus Christ. We'll talk about the season of the fig tree again, and we'll continue in our unmasking or the unskirting of our nation in its sins. Well, that's it for our program as far as that goes. Now, from the home office, get some good news here. All right, now, let's pick this up now. We've got a guest in town. Actually, I mentioned this in our program last week. Chuck Baker, we had ordained Chuck Baker as the newest minister in our church. Chuck, why don't you come on up? He's actually here. We didn't know he'd be here today. Welcome. Glad you're here in New Orleans.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. So, Chuck, this was the ordination in Florida with Manus Salmons, he's like our regional pastor over there. And you've worked with Manus for quite a few years over there.
Right, 10 or 11 years.
10 or 11 years, that kind of overseeing and helping him in his growth in toward the ministry. We actually have Lisa, who's here. She's in our audience, but she just gave us one of those, no, I'm not coming up there. She's not going to get in front of the camera today. And so, a terrific marriage. They have their children who's also in town. So please share us a little bit, tell us a little bit about your children.
This is Jasmine, she's 17, Jaylee's 12, Lena's a year old, and Lucas is 8. And they're here with us.
Yeah, wonderful family. And we've been working with Chuck and watching Chuck over the last few years, and watching God help mature him toward the ministry. And actually, you ordained a deacon a few years ago too. How many years ago was that?
About 4 years ago.
About 4 years ago.
Yeah.
He's actually served the congregation in Tallahassee. So tell us a little bit about the congregation you were serving with over there and how long you've been in the church, and a little bit about your background.
We started in about 2006, I believe. My wife and myself got into the church and started serving over there in Monticello. We started off in Tallahassee, was there for several years, and went to Monticello, and been there for about 8 years, and then left there and was going to go to moving to Tennessee or to Florida, either one, wherever God takes us. Looks like either Tennessee or Florida right now.
Yeah, well, Chuck's in the middle Had some personal things happen to him with their job and stuff, so we need your prayers on that end of it. But we know he's going to be active and very, very visible with us. And we're hoping to be able to use him in many areas to help grow and build other congregations. Well, Chuck, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And you're going to see him a lot more as time goes on. And he's worked as an assistant feast coordinator down in Florida for a few years. So a lot of you know Chuck. So pray for him, pray for his ministry, and that he'll be able to settle into a place to be very successful in his future.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, Chuck. All right, so now let's move on. I want to bring this out because the home office, actually my brother actually sent to me, said that online now, he added a spot where you can find the media. And this is, if you went on, I'm going to back it up here. You see this media page? This is the church website, the THECOGMI. All right, that's the media portion, and has a drop-down tab. If you click on it, it drops down for you. And in that tab, what he wanted to show you is that there are video sermons on Vimeo. All right, so on Vimeo right there. And so we have, they've added 326 videos. These are sermon messages and Bible studies. And is News Nuggets and Insights also on it? Okay, we have News Nuggets and Insights also on Vimeo. Vimeo makes it a lot easier to be able to watch the program. It gives you a larger footprint, and it's a lot clearer picture. So we actually went in and took a contract out with Vimeo to put our videos online. So you have 326 videos now online. So go to the media tab, click on it. You'll have the drop-down box. Look for video sermons on Vimeo, and there you have 326 videos, and he adds all the time. Now this is quite interesting. We just added another 20 videos on Ustream. And I was looking at the other day, and just yesterday, and there was 11,800 views on Ustream already. And so God's blessed us to help get these videos out there, and people are actually watching them. 11,800 views on Ustream. All righty, we got a guest coming in town March 3rd. Mark it on your calendar. March 3rd, Brad Scott with Wild Branch Ministries. Brad does a lot of travel and he goes to a lot of churches. He will be here. We will be live streaming on March 3rd at 1 o'clock. We got the times confirmed now. Central Time now at 1 o'clock. We will have our regular services at 1 o'clock, and we're going to be breaking here, and we'll have a potluck meal. So if you're in town, come on by. We have some food. Hopefully you'll come in town and come visit with us on that particular Sabbath. Then we will come back and live stream again at 4:30. And he'll be doing another lecture series or a Bible study series at 4:30. So we'll be live streaming 2 times on that particular Sabbath. Alrighty, in the mail. We actually put in the mail the DVD offering. But in fact, by the time you see this program, you might even have it in your mailbox. The DVD offering, The Watering Hole, is actually in the mail. We also sent the 3rd portion of Mardi Gras. This is the actual NNI, the News Nuggets and Insights portion. You have 3 portions of News Nuggets and Insights, plus the sermon. So what you're looking at here is that is the sermon page or the sermon title for the biblical mystery of Mardi Gras, hiding in plain sight. So what you have on Mardi Gras, you actually have 4 different areas you can look at to put the whole picture together about what Mardi Gras represents. It's eye-opening. If you haven't seen it yet or you haven't studied it, please write for those, or actually just go online and you can see them right online and you won't have to wait. You can start that right away. Well, there you have it. That's our News Nuggets and Insights for this week. As always, we like to close with an uplifting video message. So we're going to close today with a little video. It's Psalms 139, and I'll be right back. Well, that's it for our program. I hope you agree with our sentiments here that this is a very important program. And take it to light and share this with as many people as you can. When you get your news email alert, it doesn't take anything to go through your mailbox and hit forward to as many people as you know. You never know, the difference may save someone's life in the future or bring them to conversion when God opens their minds and shows them the beauty of walking in the light of truth. Until next week, God be with you. Have a great day.